Welcome in, friends and future friends, whenever you're watching, however you're watching. Thank you for making the Sports in the World podcast a part of your evening, your morning, afternoon, wherever and however you're watching. I'm Ladarius. Hopefully, you're well and safe out there. On the show today, we're going to talk about SummerSlam. Obviously, the shirt. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about NFL training camps. We're going to talk about preseason football is back it's in full swing, and also Brown's big picture, the importance of the, and we'll talk about that in Brown's big picture. But let's go to, we got a couple of comments already in here. We have my guy John Brooks saying, "Ladarius, what up, my tribal chief? We the one. Yes, we are. Indeed, we are. Always gets the assignment, John. Thank you, my buddy Rachel. It's hey bestie, how are you? Check her out. If you're at the Fantasy Football Expo, please check out Unwind. It's an amazing panel. I believe it's going to be on Sunday, I believe. So check her out. Like I always say, she always does amazing. Unwind is absolutely amazing. It's a community for women who love fantasy football, who love football in general. Please check her out. She's absolutely amazing. And if you're at the expo, see her, hug her for me since I'm here. Now, speaking of football, let's talk about a little football. Like I mentioned, preseason is here, but even before that, I want to talk about two contract situations that most people are aware of, and that's the contracts of Micah Parsons and Terry McLaurin. I want to do a little deeper dive into Micah's, but let's talk about Terry McLaurin. Now, for Terry McLaurin, I think he's going to make almost $24 million this year. And what's interesting when you look at Terry McLaurin's stats, he led in targets, he led in reception, he led in receiving yards, even led in touchdowns. And literally the number two on that list in all those categories was Zach Ertz. So it's something to think about. And it's not a knock on Zach Ertz. It just goes to show you how important Terry McLaurin is in this Commanders offense with Jaden Daniels and with offense coordinator Cliff Kingsbury. So I see a comment by John, and I'm gonna get to that in a second. But it's a good point, but I'll get to that in a second. Now, going back to Terry McLaurin, it's very interesting because listen. Yeah, you can get a trade request, but listen, there's no way Washington's going to trade because when you look at the receiving room, we have to be honest. We have to keep it 100, not 95. We have to keep it 100 here. Terry McLaurin is a valuable asset, not just last season, but for a lot of seasons for this Commanders franchise. And trading him, what do you get of value? Like I said, you'll never get equitable value. You'll never get anything of equal value. When you're trading a player like McLaurin, especially when we talk about Michael, like I said, we'll get to that as well. So, when I look at Spot Track, and Spot Track likes to produce market values. So when you look at the market value of a Terry McLaurin, it's at 4 years at $24.5 million, give or take like $98.2 million. Give it at the total value of the deal. Now, here's something that's very interesting is that so I think at some point I think Terry McLaurin's deal is going to get done because when you look at the players that who are got similar deals. When you look at Cortland Sutton had a 4-year, him and Calvin Ridley 4-year $92 million deals, and you also look at Chris Godwin who got a 2-year $66 million deal. So they averaged around the same age, like 29 years old, 29, 30 years old when getting those contracts. Like Terry McLaurin's going to probably get somewhere in the neighborhood, maybe a 3-year deal. Maybe he'll get the 4-year, but he's going to get paid because he's too valuable of a player to this offense. And the instant rapport he had with Jaden Daniels in his rookie season was absolutely amazing. And now, when we talk about fantasy value, that's something we can talk about down the road. But when you look at the most 1,000 receiving yards amongst active players. He's tied for fourth with Justin Jefferson and AJ Brown with 5. Now we know Mike Evans is 11. We know DeAndre Hopkins is at 7, and Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, Brandon Cooks, Keenan Allen at 6. So you pay him, and I said he's great receiving. Now the touchdowns. Now you go in that same category. He only has 31 career touchdowns. That's among active players. That's top 20. But you still pay him because you don't. Here's the thing. When you look at a guy like Terry McLaurin, you get the guy for the yards. And could he be a weapon in the red zone? Absolutely, he could. But the way this offense is, we don't know. He could potentially see more opportunities in the red zone this season. But you don't let him walk out the door. I think maybe he may necessarily get the 4-year, the market value that Spot Track is projecting, but he's going to get at least maybe that 2 to 3 year kind of deal, potentially maybe on the 3-year deal side, and maybe with the guarantees, it might put you the value kind of up in that maybe that $92 million range. So that's so I think that situation I feel will be resolved before the season. Now, before I talk about Micah Parsons, we have John talking about I wish the Falcons would play starters Friday, but we're going to Raheem. With that, John, it's always interesting how head coaches handle the preseason. Because you would have that would play, have their starters play at least a snap and some even a series. And, I remember at one point they have them play like a quarter even. But given the money and given the situations, I don't see a situation where, it happens. But with Raheem, I would like to see Michael Penix get some snaps because, it'll be his first full season with the offense. With Zach Robinson, I would kind of like to see him get reps because there's difference between getting, there's difference between you getting, reps in the training camp, and there's difference between getting them in game action, even though it's preseason. And I do think that kind of makes a difference in that regard. So, and then John also talks about the Terry McLaurin situation. The Commanders are a fool if they let Scary Terry go. Due to playmakers, the best one the Commanders have beside. Yeah, and that's also important too in terms of offensive pieces. He is arguably second to Jaden Daniels in that regard, in my opinion. So that's an interesting point. Now, shifting from one contract situation to another, let's talk about Micah Parsons because this situation is not as clear cut and black and white. Essentially, Micah Parsons is going to make $24 million this season. However, end of his rookie deal. And, listen, Spot Track markets him at making almost $38 million over the course of 4 years. And to me, it's not a terrible contract, given what you see with Myles Garrett got 4 years, $100 million max. Crosby got 3 years over $106 million. TJ Watt, 3-year, $123 million. So it's not unprecedented. So, and those are 3 of the better defensive players in the National Football League. So here's what makes it interesting. I feel that the longer this goes, the more it actually favors Micah Parsons. Usually negotiations, it's kind of like, well, maybe it favors the team. No, I think this could be a situation where this could leak into week 1 of the regular season. Now, I don't have the sources, but just I go off vibes and being a sport. I get those vibes that I don't know how close. I assume they're not. Maybe they're close. Maybe they're not far apart. But this may not be the happy ending that Cowboys fans want. Because if Micah wants to be traded, and we've seen Jerry trade away, great players. We saw DeMar Cooper. It's just the value. What do you want in return? And this is what I always say. Myles Garrett wanted to be traded, paid. There was little rumors that TJ Watt, they're going to. Here's the problem. Trading a guy like Micah Parsons, you're never going to get equal value. And there's not many teams who can match the package that you could want in return for a guy like Micah Parsons. Because there's always a difference when you're trading star players. I don't care what I don't care if it's NFL, NBA. I don't care. I don't care what the sport is. NFL, NBA, MLB. I don't care what the sport is. And at the end of the day, and before I continue, because the leader of the division, my wise man, Craig is here. Thank you, Craig, for coming and watching the show. We got to get Craig on the show. Very good. IDP, listen, we'll get more fancy football talk, and he's definitely going to be one of the guys I have circled on the list. And listen, Jerry Jones, the problem with Dallas starting the store. Yes. And more specifically, the problem is Jerry running his mouth. And it's not unprecedented because sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. And Jerry's been his worst enemy for pushing over 30 years. The problem with Jerry is how you pay your players and when you should pay them. Listen, I've always said that, especially with these rookie deals and when some of these rookies, whether it's offense or defense, they'll show you season one, their rookie season or the sophomore season that they're going to be this great. You get on it now because the old adage is today's price is not tomorrow's price. That's simply the reality. You get it nipped in the bud and you don't let it drag out, because now we're in a situation, if you're a Cowboys fan, you're legit worried if Micah Parsons is going to be a Dallas Cowboy. If you're a Commanders fan, you're not at the point of worry about Terry McLaurin quite yet, because I think that deal is more likely to get done before the season, I believe. But the thing with Micah Parsons is interesting because, like the guys I mentioned the TJ Watts, I mentioned the Myles Garrett, I mentioned Max Crosby. Now, since Micah Parsons joined the league in 2021, now in terms of sacks, he has the 5th most sacks in the National Football League. Garrett at 60, Watt at 58.5, Trey Hendrickson, his own little contract situation there, but he has 57, and Nick Bosa at 53.5. And Max Crosby is not too far on the list with 42.5. He's 7th. Now, of those names mentioned, Garrett, Watt, Bosa, and Crosby are paid. They're paid. And it makes me hard to believe that you don't pay a guy like Micah Parsons. It's absolutely insane. It's absolutely insane to think about Micah Parsons not being on the Dallas Cowboys. And however you may feel about Micah Parsons personally, Micah Parsons is the type of player, he's that Aaron Donald type player where you always have to, just that we had to know where 99 is for the Rams, you have to know where number 11 is for the Dallas Cowboys, is on the field at all times. And you have to account for him. He's on that level. And if you're Jerry, the more this drags on, the more money you have to spend. And a handshake deal, sure, but I want to know how much that handshake deal was. Like I said, I'm not saying you're wrong, John. I'm just curious to know how much that handshake deal is, because that handshake deal, if it ain't anywhere near, if it ain't anywhere in the neighborhood of $30 to $40 million a season, them handshakes are terrible. Wash your hands and start the handshaking, whatever. Just do it again. And we got April and Ron Tomlinson. What up, everyone? How you doing, Ron and April? And I'm going to go back to John's comment earlier that the Cowboys don't pay for it. I see him getting traded, but I don't know where. Michael Parsons was teasing potentially going to Pittsburgh. And listen, I'm not one for conjecture or anything like that, but that would be kind of a low-key game-changing sort of trade if you do it. But a part of me just simply wants to believe that they'll figure this out. Because the fact of the matter is, you don't let a guy of the caliber of Micah Parsons walk out the door. And it feels like we're getting to that reality. And it's a sad reality. It's a sad but true reality. And the question becomes, Dallas doesn't have a backup plan? I think they pay him. How much? But like I said, the price is good. Listen, and this is a lesson not just for football but for life. Today's price is not yesterday's price, and today's price is not going to be tomorrow's price either. So at the end of the day, if they don't figure this out, it's only going to get worse. And speaking of worse, let's transition out because I do want to hit on the quarterbacks. I see a couple of team quarterback situations. If you're the Cleveland Browns, if someone told you that this team made the playoffs a couple of seasons ago, you wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe it, but they did. And ironically enough, they brought back the guy who led them in the playoffs, Joe Flacco. And now they've added Tyler. They've added a whole bunch of quarterbacks, and they drafted 2, by the way. And Shedeur Sanders is projected to get the start in Cleveland's first preseason game. And I've said this on the show. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't, but I'll say it again. Shedeur Sanders will start an NFL game in the regular season for the Cleveland Browns. Why? Because the reason why his stock fell, nothing to do with talent. I don't hear, well, the school he played for. Josh Allen played for Wyoming. No knock to the fine people of Wyoming and their football program. So it's not the scheduling. It's not who he played. It's because y'all made it personal. And Jesus, Ron. Too bad Jerry Jones can't pay Parsons with food stamps. Yeah, listen, like in the line in Son-in-Law from Pauly Shore, like he's gonna need a lot of food stamps. That's the situation I think you would need to kind of pay Micah Parsons. But going back to my point about the quarterback situation, to me, I think Shedeur, I feel that it's something about Shedeur. You watch him in college, he had no protection. His own father admitted that. And I don't care what type of quarterback you are, every quarterback will tell you they need a solid offensive line. And he simply just didn't have that at Colorado. He simply didn't have it. So now he gets to, for him to fall to the 5th round and drafting a guy like Tyler Shug out of Louis, make it make sense. And it was because this is what happens. Sometimes when you make things personal in a business situation, you can miss out on great business. Because no one said you have to like the person personally, but if they can help you make a business deal, if they can help you in the NFL team, they help you win a football game or football games, so that you consider. Because Shedeur, there are reports that how he did the tests and things of that nature. But for him to fall to the 5th round and I understand how people in the NFL draft can change in projections. But this guy looked like to be the second best quarterback in this draft class behind Cam Ward, who, by the way, went number 1 overall, by the way, for those who may have forgotten. And he goes down and just falls. And to me, the question becomes, for Kevin Stefanski, you're looking at your quarterback room right now. You're looking at who's healthy, because I think Gabriel and Pickett aren't healthy. You're not going to put Flacco out in a preseason game. We know Flacco knows what he's doing. You go and sign Tyler Huntley. It just doesn't look great in terms from the quarterback room perspective. But the penultimate question will be, what do you do moving forward? Because, listen, I want Shedeur to go out there and be great and succeed. No matter how you feel about his father, no matter how I want Shedeur to succeed. It's just a preseason game. Like, it's just a preseason game. But I want him to thrive and succeed. And that's essentially all I want in that regard. Now, when you look at the Colts situation, choose between Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson. It's a quarterback battle that it's more interesting than what it should be to me. Because you're like Daniel Jones showed talent for the Giants. And Anthony Richardson, a healthy Anthony Richardson, what are we going to get out of that? We're still kind of seeing on that. For Shane Steichen, the question becomes, you're in a division where, like, when you look at the quarterback situation, I'll put it in that context. You got Trevor Lawrence with the Jaguars, you have C.J. Stroud with the Texans, and you got what would presume to be Cam Ward starting for the Tennessee Titans. It doesn't feel terrible. The Colts were pretty good on defense last season. But the question becomes, you have 2 first-round quarterbacks, one of which you spent your top 5 pick on, in Anthony Richardson. And listen, I'm a Florida Gators fan, but there were some things in college where I'm like, maybe he should have stayed and cleaned up some things. And you have to be honest about your teams, because listen, you can support your team. I'm not gonna tell you who to support or not support, but it's like, I'm a Cubs fan, and to all your teams, you have to be honest. And I signed the original and said that he didn't look like an NFL quarterback at Florida. And that's not a knock on his talent, because I want him to succeed. I want to be wrong. But his combine numbers was like boom, and then his stock just rose like a rocket from the launch pad here from Kennedy Space Center here in Florida. It skyrocketed. And that's fine. That's great. But in the brass tacks, the question becomes, is he a franchise quarterback? Because a lot of people felt Daniel Jones was a franchise quarterback. That's a situation, if I had to say today, it really feels like it's 50-50, to be perfectly honest. I think you can make a case for Daniel Jones, you can make a case, but this is why the preseason matter, because you figure out, battles you had in training camp, and you get a gauge of, in that regard. And Craig coming on here saying he's kind of like my Ladarius Brown. Listen, it's a great stock. It's a great stock. And listen, we're gonna our wise men and I had a moment at SummerSlam. If you watched it, you watched it. But listen, get some of that LB stock. And then we got John jumping in here. For the love of God, can James Pierce quit getting into fight the training up? The dude remind me of Peter Griffin fighting the chick. Listen, we need it. Listen, this is the Falcons fan coming. We lack tenacity on that front seven. Listen, I don't condone be the bejesus at your teammates, but he does kind of need to tone it down and kind of get the discipline. If you can ring it in, and Ron, I'll get the link in a minute. I'll also I got a couple more things to talk about. I think the reality is, and the fact of the matter is, I want to listen. You want aggressiveness, and listen, I do want James Pierce to kind of ring it in to a certain extent. I really do, but we shall see on that. And speaking of what we shall see and things that we saw, SummerSlam was over the weekend, and 2-night SummerSlam, the first ever 2-night SummerSlam, and people want to debate, what was better, night 1 or night 2? Listen, why can't people just enjoy it? Like, both endings to me were shocking. For one was for a good reason, and one to me, I still trying to wrap the old brain around. But all in all, I'm not going to go through match by match, but I'm going to give you what I loved. And we're going to stand, as someone who loves women's wrestling, Naomi, to me, with the championship, is doing amazing things. It goes to show you that when you make that turn, and you make that heel turn specifically, and oh man, the wise man, oh man. But I think the thing is the fact of the matter is, I'm very curious to see where she go and move, because I still think there's stuff with Bianca Belair. People are like, oh, I still think that the whole thing with Bianca Belair, the triumvirate of Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill, who lost Tiffany Stratton in for the women's title match, and Naomi. There's something there that more because I'm not under the belief that Naomi. I think there's some more and it's layered because I go back to the promo and the way how she was talking to Bianca, and it felt like Naomi gave off the vibe that Naomi was that Bianca was very unappreciative of what maybe potentially taking out Jade Cargill and Naomi taking the rap for it. I tell people something to think about. But I want to go back. Let's backtrack to John talking about. That's what I did. He did talk about that, and I like Pierce has passion. Don't get me wrong, but if he does that again, he could, and that's why I say you got to ring in. Like I say, you got to ring in passionate players. You never want to knock and demote passion, especially when you're playing football. Football's a sport of aggression, but you don't want it to hurt with 15-yard penalties, unsportsmanlike conduct stuff. And in terms of Craig with night one, the night without Becky Hogan was better. He always teases me, and since he took us there, he took us here. That match between her and Lyra was great, and I love the inclusion of Bayley, because here's the thing. I'm not defending that Becky Lynch winning because I love Becky Lynch. There's something there between them two. And it's not writing off Lyra. I don't think they're writing off Lyra. It may feel that way. They're not burying Lyra. Okay? Let's be super clear. They're not burying her. I think, and people understand, the Becky Bayley situation becomes interesting because my initial thought was that Bayley and Lyra, that Bayley was going to screw over Lyra, but in the storyline, the only natural heel in all of this is Becky Lynch. And listen, so when I saw Bayley show up, I'm like, okay, well, she's going to go after Becky, which she did. But something of note is that she accidentally decked Lyra too. So could we get some get back for that at some point? Because I think what we're going to get, and if they do run it back, if we get the triple threat, Lyra wins it. And I think this is a long-term storyline kind of situation. And so that's my regards in that. And then also we got John. WWE should have finished the storyline with Naomi, Bianca, and Jade. WWE left that open. Exactly. See, that's the thing, John. And that's my point. They didn't close the door on it. They left it wide open and open to whatever. And that's why I feel it's not over. And I think people forgetting it. And I think seeing, people reminding, hey, Bianca. And that's why you see with Naomi and Jade, it's still alive, but I think it gets kicked into full gear. I think, and we finally get that closure, that much needed closure, I should say. And John jumps in and says, I think Nikki's going to beat Becky. We're going to get Bayley versus Becky. We're going to get Lyra versus Nikki. I'm not upset at that. I'm not really upset at it because listen, if you watch Raw, listen, the exchange between Becky and Nikki, listen, it was. I'm gonna leave it at that. Go back and watch what she talked about. It's good stuff. But I'm not upset at that because if they're transitioning to Bayley versus Becky, which I do think they're doing, but Lyra versus Nikki, I would not be upset. And if you give the belt, see, it's interesting. I don't know how to feel about Nikki's being the IC champ. Get back to me on that. Like, I'll get back to you on that. Like, you're gonna get back to me, John. You did great. And Craig said, but my problem with SummerSlam in general, too many matches had the same stuff involved. Almost every match had interference, foreign objects. 3 matches had some mess with the turnbuckle. See, I agree with you, Craig. I think the problem is it's not just the finishes they have to change, it's the predictability. I think it was very predictable. Like, and I'll admit, in the Becky Lyra match, I expected someone to come in and interfere because in a match that's no holds barred, there's no disqualification. Somebody had to get involved, and the best candidate was Bayley, who didn't have a match on the card. Now, but what I will add is that I do think you don't have to put certain matches up on the certain concept. I do think you don't have. I think my biggest thing, Craig, and Craig brings it. It's not that I think it's too many matches. I just felt like, let's be honest, they did Julia versus Zelina Vega the night before on SmackDown, and I felt they did that because this couldn't fit the card. And I could argue that maybe you could have put a match or two on this card. I'll let you decide which two or which ones. Felt like you could have put this bad boy on Raw or SmackDown. I'll leave it at that. Like, the tag team match, that belonged at SummerSlam. I felt that if you're like, I'm not going to even disagree with Craig because Craig is right. With the finishes, I think the predictability, change the predictability of it. I think that's number one. Number two, if you're going to put, like I said, Julia versus Zelina Vega on SmackDown, I could argue that you could have maybe put another match on Raw or SmackDown to cut the card. Because let's face it, not every match is SummerSlam worthy. I hate to be that guy. I hate to be the person to say, whatever. But someone has to be that guy, and it's going to be me. It's going to be me. Well, that's all I can say. I don't want to get copyrighted. But well said on that, Craig. Now, listen, we got to talk about Seth Rollins. And people are saying, "Oh, well, why is he champion?" What once again, this is what gets me. And once again, people are like, "Oh, you're like Becky, you're like Seth, and you're defending them." No, I'm defending. Listen. I'm gonna tell you something, and I think like a couple of people know this. I don't think I told the story. Somebody, well, they're blocked, so they're not watching or listening. But someone called me a CM Punk mark, and I thought it was hilarious. And I argued back and forth with the person. I said, I'm a Seth Rollins guy, and yeah, I'm defending CM Punk. I think because like when they first fought on the debut of Raw on Netflix, I'm like, that was a great match. I think that was a great. And then his post interview, like, oh, you're talking about what happened on the card. I'm like, buddy, calm down. Long story short, sometimes the IWC can lose control and lose the plot real quickly. There's some real ones in here. You see them in this chat. There's some not so real ones that you will go. But Greg brings up something. They are falling into an AEW issue. Think of the end of Cody Cena now. How does any human pin Cody now? Look at all the finishers, the huge spots couldn't be pinned. The art of the finish, Craig, has. Think about this. When you think of all the spear, I think I can't recall the match. Maybe you guys can help me out in the chat. Like when you see Roman Reigns' matches and how many spears he was handing out, and that was never the finish of the match. Think about that. Put it in this context. Think about and please, Craig, keep ranting. I gotta like I said, Craig, you're gonna come on the show at some point whenever you're available to do so because. Like I said, Craig is just an absolute great human being and just gives out the best conversation, one of the most positive people. So he's definitely going to be on this show. But he makes a great point about the art of the finish. Because think about this. When Stone Cold Steve Austin did the stunner, we all knew that was the end of the match. Or we felt that it was going to be the end. To my knowledge, I don't think Steve was handing out like 5-6 stunners in any match. In any match, he was not handing out any sort of finish. It was all clear cut in there. And I feel that in many regards, I think Craig is right. And I think you look at that Cody, look how many F5s, you know, that John Cena did. Look at how many finishing moves he did. And you're like, we all like Cody. This is not a knock against Cody. It's not a knock against John Cena. It was a great match. But here's the problem. And Craig makes the point. It takes out the art of the finish. It does. And now then you get stuck with the finish that leaves you perplexed. And this is why I said, that's why Craig is right. And it's not just and you just didn't see this happening at SummerSlam. We've seen match after match. We've seen, like, if I ask people today, like, in terms of current finishers, what's a finisher that when done is the end of the match? Because I could argue you shouldn't have to give out, unless you're playing WWE 2K, you're not handing out like 5 finishers to beat someone. Like, it's called a finisher for a reason. And it should be used when you finish a match. It's just like you go to a restaurant, you have your starter, you have your entree, and your main course. You're not eating dessert before you eat the entree. Okay? It wouldn't make sense. Like, well, I'm going to have 5 desserts, and then, you know what? That's not enough. Then I'm going to go back. Like, things have an order and a structure. And it's not like old man ranting, but to me, it's an issue. Because, like, as much as I love the RKO, is that the one finisher where you can go, man, that still has the impact? Because let me tell you something. That RKO had a lot of power 15, 20 years ago. Even 10 years ago. So, and Craig brings it, like, you heard, Cena Cody was a great match. I think Cena's best since he did. I think it goes farther than this year. It does. Because, like I said, I'm not knocking the match. It's just like Craig brings up the points, like, how many finishers, like, are we going to do? Like, if you do signature moves, I'm not going to be upset. But we're seeing F5s and Cody cutters, and everyone's kicking out at 2.5. Then it goes through the changing course of how wrestling looks. And so I think that's, to me, it's how today's wrestling looks. Good, bad, or indifferent. And then John jumps in and says, I wonder where Charlotte X. That's a great point. I think the women's, and let me just take a break from that discourse I was talking about to talk about, listen, I think Charlotte and Alexa, I think it's interesting because, listen, I think the right team won. I think you think about it, you got the Kabuki Warriors. I think we're a strong team. You're going to start seeing, I think you got Natty and Maxine Dupree. Like, that's a team that's very interesting. It's a dynamic, so I think you're bringing it up, John. And then back to Craig saying, I do like that they have more or less still protected the 3D. Yes, that's very true. And I know it isn't majorly used since the Usos, but even with the Usos rolling, like, interference broke the pinup. Exactly. Like, you can still protect the finish because, see, here's the thing. Today's wrestling is not wrestling the way it was 15, 20 years ago. I could argue that you can argue the NFL is not. You can argue literally any sport you've ever watched is not the same way it was 15, 20 years ago. But some things you could keep preserved. And some things you can adaptability change. And then Craig also goes on and says, like, maybe 5 people ever have. Yeah. Because, like, I was going to say even less than, yeah. And that feels like a good number because it's a great finisher. Like, in the Attitude Era, think about, like I said, how many people kicked out of the sharpshooter, or the history of wrestling. Like, you think it'd be all time great. How many people kicked out of Bret Hart sharpshooter? How many people have kicked out of a stunner? How many people have kicked out of Sweet Chin Music? How many people have kicked out of a pedigree? Like, when you start going through some of these great all-time finishers, like, how many people throughout the duration? I'm not talking just within like, in general. And it's a legit conversation. It's not knocking the Cody Cena match, but when you have all those, it takes about 10 finishers to beat a guy. And I want to put up, Craig's comment that he made, because here's the thing. It's like, how does anyone pin Cody now? That's the question. And it's not Cody's fault. It's not the fault of those who produced it. It's just it's trying to adapt to today's wrestling fans. They loved it. It was a great all-time match. But here's at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is this. It's the preservation of the finish. And we've seen how wrestling has changed. Like I said, your favorite sport has changed. And it's a matter of adaptability or not watching it. Like back in the day, when I saw the stunner, like when Stone Cold was stunning people in the ring, I'm like, oh man, the stunner looks unbeatable when it's presented. The RKO looked, beatable. Even to a certain point where, like, to me, I'm an Undertaker all-time favorite guy when it came to the Tombstone Pile Driver or the Last Ride. It had meaning. Now, I'm not saying that, let's ban the moves. All I'm conjecturing is that we have to have a conversation about the art of the finish, and like to Craig's excellent point. That's all. Because listen, your favorite sport is changing. So think about that. Now, before we get out of here, a little house cleaning. Like, listen, subscribe to the Sports in the World podcast. You can follow me on social media at @Ladairs_Brown on Twitter and TikTok. I'm getting back into a little TikTok. I did, if you saw the video I did after night one, thank you for the support on it. And Instagram is Ladairs _Brown, because I guess there's a Ladairs _Brown somewhere. They're trying to be like me. But anyway, we're not going to get into that. Also, if you're still on the Facebook, check me out on the Facebook as well. So, that myself and the page. And so, to close up the show, I want to piggyback, still in the realm of wrestling. I want to talk about support, passion, because in a business like wrestling, just like in life, we want to root sometimes for the underdog, and you can root for the favorite. That's fine and dandy, no problem at all. But something that happened at SummerSlam, what really aggravated, was that Karrion Kross losing to Sami Zayn. Because if there's no one getting a bigger push or getting so much love from the wrestling community, from WWE Universe, than Karrion Kross. And there's reports that there's a contract on, that they weren't offered a contract. Now they're probably offered a contract. Because him and Scarlett on television are magic. It's absolute gold. It gives off, it's similar to when you're listening to the fans, like when people listen to the fans about Jey Uso. Jey Uso became world champion. And similarly when we came to LA Knight. And then Paul Heyman on the Ariel Harari, show, that I saw that, I don't know if Carrie's listening, but Carrie shared it in our group chat. I shared it earlier. I think I should have shared it in the other chat. I apologize for that. But it's interesting because Paul Heyman was asked about Karrion Kross. And if there's anybody who knows anything about wrestling, when I think of 5 people walking planet Earth who knows everything about wrestling, how it's done, the art of it, like Paul Heyman's on that list. Like, he understands it. And to me, in terms of manager, him and Bobby the Brain Heenan were just fantastic. But that's a debate for another day. But he spoke about Karrion Kross. And he said something, and if you haven't checked it out, please check it out. I urge you to check it out. Because when they were talking about it, I'm going to read you the quote that directly came from on which that was posted for the video, and it really makes you think about what he said, because he was asked about Karrion Kross, and he said something on there that was very profound, and he said, when he was asked that the audience is calling for him to be a bigger star. If we don't deliver on a correct timetable, an impatient audience is going to get behind him even more. And he basically said it reminded him of a guy named Steve Austin. In terms of we're going to get the chant, the signs, and he's right. And and just like first of all, John jumps in and says, please resign Cross. Absolute hashtag we want Cross. Let's get that hashtag going. And Craig says for every Jey Uso, Kofi, Bryan that they give it to, there's another that they won't. Okay, Cross, LA Knight. Damian Sandow should have gotten a bigger push because his character work was absolutely fantastic. Like the stuff he did, I think he did with the Miz, like I think he's at NWA now, and I get a chance to watch that from time. I get a chance to watch that. He's still brilliant, and to me, like that doesn't get talked about enough. I could argue that someone who should have got pushed was Santina Marella. And they had a chance at the Royal Rumble, and they gave it to Alberto Del Rio. That's all you need to know. Someone brought it up, like the Chris Van Fleet was talking to Sam, and I was trying to forget it. I'm like the worst Royal Rumble. Like to me, that was like people like, oh, you know what? Worst Royal Rumble when they got it wrong. That's when they got it wrong. They gave it to Alberto Del Rio and did absolutely anyway. You all know the story. I'm trying not to get upset. But Craig makes a solid point here, and this is why I say a guy like Karrion Kross. Think about this. He was the leader of his own faction, and then just like the snap of his hands, AOP got released. Paul Ellering got released. So now it went back to Karrion being solo, and he could have easily just gave up and be like, I'm done. I've cooked. But he reinvented himself, and he did it. And one of the ways that he did it was to naturally be himself because he's a very bright guy. He has a very, very excellent way with words. The way it's absolutely amazing. I'm gonna order his book. So that's my reminder to say on the show that I'm gonna get his book because I read good things and the little stuff that it's brilliant. I guess my thing is this. Like Craig said, it's if you think about this, and the best way to talk about it is to me, I love music. So I grew up in that like 90s, 2000s era of music. Like in terms like fully engrossed in it, like I was in middle school, high school sort of stuff. Like elementary, yeah, I was into some still had no business listening to, but hey, that's how we turned out. Us millennials. But I always said people talked about Britney Spears. People talked about Christina Aguilera. And I felt who got ignored. And she still has a great career today. But I felt people didn't acknowledge her was Mandy Moore. She had the one hit Candy. And it felt like you could do something. But she turns out she was on This Is Us. She's a great actress. But for every Britney, for every Christina that gets pushed, there's a Mandy Moore. And think about this: for every NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, people forgot about like there was O-Town, and then there was 98 Degrees. I like to use music. If people who know me, I love it's, and it kind of ties into Craig's point. For every Yes movement, the Kofi movement, for Jey Uso, the Yeet movement, we get the guys like Cross and LA Knight, and we get the Damian Sandow, which doesn't get talked about enough. So I guess my point, and even in life, we feel that people are just getting elevated and pushed. And I guess the message is, keep doing what you're doing. People are watching, and they're not going to tell you they're watching, but trust me, they're watching you, and they're not ignoring what you're doing and what you're bringing in terms of product. They're watching you, and they're seeing what you're doing. And I think Karrion Kross and the reason why he's getting the love from the fans, we're watching and we're ignoring it. And to Craig's point, unfortunately, just like in life, you want to be seen, and some people get seen and be great, and sometimes people are great and don't be seen. And people are still rooting for him, they still get the support, and that's Karrion Kross. And I hope at some point that Karrion gets to push, you know, but like Paul also said on the show, like if he was the IC or US champ, would he still have the same kind of thing? Because remember, LA Knight won the United States Championship. I believe they gave Jey Uso the Intercontinental Championship. So, but did it change the way that people felt about him? To a certain extent, but people were still rooting for him. And it's how you get it done. And you always root for guys like Karrion. There's a lot of guys on the roster you can make a case. Like, listen, I'm personally rooting for Natalya and Maxine to work because the women's division, the tag team division could use some help, especially when they let go of, when they let go, especially if I can talk, that'd be great. When they get rid of Katana Chance and Kaden Carter, like when they got rid of them, like it changed the concept. When they, Shayna Baszler still, when they got rid of a lot of people, it changed the way the women's division shaped. When Mara Sade now, but then Jakara Jackson got cut, so Lash was out on her own. So I'm rooting for the women's division. There's women in that division who I'm absolutely rooting for. There's root for Karrion Kross. There's a lot of people you can root for. And let me tell you something. Here's another message. Don't let the IWC tell you who to root. Listen, there's some people you root for, and people are like, yeah, there's some people you root, and they go boo. Listen, there's one person, we're not going to talk about it. If you rooted for that person, listen, you got a lot. Yeah, you got a lot of heat last week and still some this week. But listen, support the person, support what they do. The men and women go out there and leave them alive. So shout out to Karrion Kross and shout out to absolutely what they do as well. So I catch my breath because I got to start learning to take pauses after I talk. Friends and future friends, I know I'm sorry. I apologize. Oh boy, what a way to wrap up the show, Craig. Look. That's a case study that can be written. That could be somebody's final thesis to get their degree. Because to me, I'll say this before I get out of here. Accountability is everything. No matter what industry you're in, no matter you're in the people business, the not the people business, it matters. And to me, a lot of fans aren't going to get over what Tessa Blanchard did, and a lot of people are going to get over what Hulk Hogan did. And if you support it, look, that's your prerogative. But I also say this: be prepared to defend. Just in the same way I have defended people about, Becky Lynch, my guy Craig here, he always says Becky Hogan, and he means it in a joking manner. But you got other people out there who take it to a level that's unnecessary. So, and then let's see, we got John in here. Compare Maxine and Natty as the tag team. I don't see them beating. No, I don't either. But listen, if you're gonna have that tag team belts, you got to have competitors. And I think that we'll get more. I just want to see them succeed. I want to see everybody succeed. That's the message. But going back to Tessa Blanchard, she's in the same level with the late Hulk Hogan. It's where more people are talking about the stuff you did out of the ring than you did in the ring, and that's never good. If you're an athlete and if people don't remember the home runs or the shots that you made or the goals that you made, they remember what you did off of it more, and then that's your legacy. And people, listen, a lot of people have very divisive legacies. And sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes we as fans and we as people write the legacies of these people, and sometimes these people themselves write it. So it's a twofold situation. But speaking of the situation is we're out of time for this episode of Sports and the World Podcast, and I apologize in the chat to Ron. Probably the next episode they have more time, but I don't want we're almost at an hour. I tried not to go over that, but had a lot to unpack. But friends and future friends, until you see and hear me again next time, I'm the Darius. Be real, be you, be blessed, and be safe. We're always here from the Sports and the World podcast. And thank you, Craig. And by the way, we're going to get Craig on the show at some point as well, my friends and future friends.